Most people assume that if someone doesn't use social media, they're antisocial, disconnected, or afraid of people. Psychology says something very different. People who avoid social media usually want connection just as much as everyone else. They want belonging. They want to be understood. What they don't want is exposure. This video isn't about technology. It's about risk. Because for some minds, social media isn't a place to connect. It's a place where identity is constantly tested, ranked, and judged. And choosing not to participate is not weakness. It's a psychological strategy. So what exactly are they protecting themselves from? Every human manages how they appear to others. That's not insecurity, that's survival. Psychologists describe two main styles of self-presentation. The first is assertive. You put yourself out there. You seek visibility. You gain status through attention. Social media is built for this type. The second style is protective. You still care how you're seen, but you minimize risk. You avoid environments where one mistake can redefine you. People with this style don't dislike people. They dislike uncontrolled audiences. On social media, context collapses, tone disappears, silence becomes judgment. For a protective personality, that's not connection, that's exposure without control. So avoidance becomes intentional, not passive, not ignorant. It's a calculated decision to protect identity, dignity, and emotional stability. And that calculation is driven by one powerful fear. Rejection on social media isn't always loud. It's often quiet. No likes, no comments, no response. Psychologically, silence is brutal. For emotionally sensitive people, being ignored activates the same neural pathways as direct rejection. Social media turns social life into a scoreboard. Numbers replace nuance. Popularity becomes visible. Comparison never stops. People who avoid these platforms often aren't less social. They're more aware of how deeply evaluation affects them. They know that. One post can trigger days of rumination. Comparison erodes self-worth. Validation becomes addictive. So they opt out, not because they don't care what others think, but because they care too much to expose themselves constantly. They're not avoiding people. They're avoiding permanent judgment. And rejection is only one part of the threat. Some people don't avoid social media because they hate it. They avoid it because they understand it. These platforms are engineered around reward loops, unpredictable feedback, intermittent validation, endless novelty. Psychology calls this variable reinforcement. It's the same system used in slot machines. People who are highly self-aware sense this quickly. They notice how attention fragments, how time disappears, how mood starts depending on reactions from strangers, and that awareness triggers resistance. For them, the danger isn't embarrassment, it's dependence. They fear becoming someone who checks before thinking, posts before feeling, scrolls instead of reflecting. So non-use becomes an act of self-regulation, not discipline through effort, but discipline through environmental control. If temptation is removed, willpower isn't constantly drained. That choice isn't moral, it's psychological. And once control's protected, another concern takes center stage. Social media quietly turns life into a stage. Moments aren't just lived, they're framed, edited, performed. For some personalities, this feels natural. For others, it feels invasive. Not everyone wants their thoughts archived. Not everyone wants their emotions searchable. Not everyone wants growth frozen in old posts. Psychologically, this is about identity fluidity. Some people need the freedom to change without witnesses. They don't want old opinions resurfacing, past selves misrepresenting the present, moments reduced to content. Visibility feels like permanence, and permanence feels like pressure. So they step back, not because they're hiding, but because they value privacy as a form of psychological space. And once visibility is removed, conflict becomes easier to avoid. That's where this leads next. Social media doesn't just connect people, it collides them. Different values, different morals, different realities, all forced into one feed. For some minds, this is stimulating. For others, it's exhausting. Conflict online is rarely resolved. It escalates. Screens remove empathy. Algorithms reward outrage. Psychologically, constant exposure to conflict creates threat fatigue. The nervous system stays alert, defensive, reactive. People who avoid social media often recognize this early. They know arguments don't change minds. Nuance gets punished. Silence gets interpreted as guilt, so they withdraw. Not because they can't handle disagreement, but because they refuse to let chaos rent space in their head. Avoidance becomes emotional hygiene, and behind that choice sits a deeper realization. At some point, many non-users stop asking, "How do I use this?" They start asking, "Why does this exist?" They notice patterns. Outrage spreads faster than truth. Extremes get amplified. Attention becomes currency. Psychologically, this creates distrust, not paranoia, discernment. They sense that platforms don't reward honesty. They reward engagement, and engagement thrives on fear, comparison, conflict. For people who value internal stability, that trade-off feels wrong. So opting out becomes philosophical, not anti-technology, anti-manipulation. They're not rejecting connection. They're rejecting systems that profit from emotional volatility. And when you step back far enough, a final truth becomes clear. When psychologists compare social media users and non-users, they don't find a lack of social needs. They find different threat thresholds. People who avoid social media tend to score higher in emotional sensitivity, self-reflection, long-term thinking. They simulate consequences before acting. They ask, "What will this cost me emotionally? Who gets access to this version of me? What happens if this follows me for years?" That mental pause changes everything. While many chase visibility, others choose selective presence. They invest in fewer relationships, but deeper ones. Less broadcasting, more meaning. This isn't superiority, it's preference. And once you understand that, the stereotype collapses. People who don't use social media aren't disconnected. They're filtering. They aren't silent. They're selective. They didn't fail to adapt. They chose a different strategy. In a culture that rewards constant visibility, they protect invisibility. In a system that pushes performance, they choose authenticity without an audience. And the most misunderstood part? They aren't rejecting people. They're rejecting environments that turn human psychology into a product. So next time you meet someone who isn't online, don't assume they're behind. They may have simply decided their mind was worth more than the feed.